So today we're doing part 2 of chapter 3, and we're looking primarily at the social, the intellectual, and the artistic elements of colonial society. I'll ask you this. Oh, and I will pass back material that you have here so that you have it. So let me pass back stuff that you have here. But does anybody recall any major takeaways? Oh, this is 3B. See, Bulldog Block completely threw me off. All right. About social life in the colonies. Did anybody have a takeaway that they were like, wow, I remember that? Where's Patrick? Oh. Yeah, good.
There was difference between New England and Chesapeake. They had a lot longer life expectancy in New England, and they had a plainer diet.
Okay, that's I guess that's social. I was kind of hoping to get away from the differences between New England and the Chesapeake. We're beating that that horse, over the head, and kind of give me another picture. What you had was fine. Jake.
The jobs were kind of diverse. So you got a certain job, you work with that state people, so you kind of hang out with that.
Are you telling me there was no social mobility?
No, I'm saying you were if you were a whaler, you say you will with your people, you be with those people, so you go there with those people.
Okay. All right. You know what? Let me just get this passed back here, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to concentrate on that. Okay. All right. Key social developments in the colony. Diversity, mobility. Did anybody have a takeaway for that? Yeah.
In the Americas, because of all the extra, or the land relative to the population, there is a lot of land, so you can start with nothing and work your way up.
Yes, that is an important characteristic of the American colonial experience, the ability to move up socially, based on whatever effort you put in, but there was the opportunity to move up. And it really stemmed from the availability of land. And I love how you phrased it, relative to the amount of people that there were. There was a ton of land available. So if you wanted to start over, become independently wealthy, just acquire land, and you could rise from the lower classes to the upper classes. You didn't rely on your heredity to do it. So that's excellent. That is a big ticket item and something that's usually asked on a test. What else? Anything about diversity? Nothing? Yeah, John.
Large amounts of immigration from Europe, from various countries such as France, Germany.
Okay, you got France, you got Germany, you got the Dutch, I think I saw the Swiss in there somewhere. You got your Huguenots, whatever the heck they are.
They're French Christians.
They're French Protestants, let's be clear. Because French Catholics are also Christian as well. But since the French king subscribes to Catholicism, the persecuted French Protestants, and a lot of them made their way to America to escape religious persecution. But the fact that you've got this diversity in the American colonies, and that there are pockets of population throughout the colonies. What do you notice about the pockets of population here? Here's English. Here's the Scots-Irish. Here's the German. Here's the Dutch. Here's the African. What strikes you about the pockets of population throughout the American colonies? Throughout these English American colonies?
There's a lot of other people there.
Correct. There's a lot of other non-English people there. Pat, what were you going to say?
That the Scots-Irish were kind of pushed more towards their country.
All right. The Scots-Irish are towards the back country. What we would call the frontier. They are your frontiersmen. The Scots-Irish are your frontiersmen. You know, the guys with the coonskin hats and the long rifles? Those are Scots-Irish people. Your Daniel Boones exploring the mountains, going out to Kentucky. That's the Scots-Irish. They're Scots-Irish settlers. They are your frontiersmen. And there must be a reason why they like going out to the frontier, because there's like nobody out there except for Native Americans. Now here was something that struck me. Look at that. Maybe that'll turn some heads. What? Okay, what was the whoa?
That the majority of them are not English.
Yes! These are English colonies populated by people who aren't English. So, the idea of American diversity is as old as apple pie. You know, I always hear these things about, oh, these immigrants are coming here and they're taking our jobs. They took our jobs. You know, you hear that you hear that old chestnut all the time, and it's crap, because America has always been a place of immigrants and diversity. Always. Now, the two largest immigrant groups that were non-English who came here were the Scots-Irish and the German. The Germans are the Pennsylvania Dutch, okay? They live in Pennsylvania, where the Quakers, not the Quackers, the Quakers are very welcoming. You people who wrote Q-U-A-C-K-E-R-S, I wrote ducks, because that's a Quacker. The Scots-Irish are going to be more out here in the frontier, in the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah?
On the map, why is like West Virginia like isolated like perfectly?
Why is it isolated perfectly?
Like if you look at the borders, are like the sheer edges where all of the groups stop.
Actually, here's the border of, not to get down in the weeds on you here,
I
but
didn't see it.
here's the border of West Virginia.
Okay. Like the northern border, they're just like, oh, there's a block right here. Let's stop there.
There's West Virginia. But it looks like there's
There's
people
West- yeah.
living out there around the, I can't remember what towns are out there. That's a town across the river from Cumberland. I forget what town it is. I mean, for God's sakes, McCool. Is it McCool, West Virginia? Yeah. I mean, I'm out there every freaking October. All right. Now, the Scots-Irish. What do you need to know about the Scots-Irish? They are frontiersmen, they are very rebellious, and they are distrustful of authority. All authority. They don't like the King of England. They don't like colonial authority. When the Constitution is written, they don't like the Constitution because they believe it provides too much authority to a centralized government. And when George Washington and Alexander Hamilton come along and they try to tax the Scots-Irish settlers out here who are taking corn and turning it into whiskey, what do?
Rebel.
They rebel! The Whiskey Rebellion, I'm hoping that that is something that you have encountered at least sometime in your past. But they are the descendants of the Scots-Irish, the people who conducted the Whiskey Rebellion. They are distrustful of authority. When the American Revolution comes along, the Scots-Irish are the first one to take up arms. They are known as fighters. They are known as brawlers. They're also known as heavy drinkers, too. Now, we could get down in the weeds and ask the question, well, why are these people so distrustful of authority that they would want to move so far away from civilization out into the mountains and the frontier? Because it comes from where they are from. Remember I told you about how the English were trying to eradicate the Catholics from Ireland? Here's England. There's Ireland. So what the English started doing was they started moving people from Scotland into Ireland. As a matter of fact, they were moving Scotch Protestants to Catholic Ireland and forcing them to breed with one another. They wanted to literally breed the Catholics out of Ireland. Yes?
Is that why there's two parts of...
That is why there are two parts to Ireland today. There is Ireland, and then there is Northern Ireland, which is technically a part of the United Kingdom. And it's why the Irish and it's why the Catholics and the Protestants in Northern Ireland have been fighting with each other for 400 years, 300 years. Okay, when you hear about the Irish Republican Army, those are Irish Catholics fighting against the British Crown. Okay, so the people living here in what today is called Northern Ireland or Ulster, those people are very distrustful of government in general. So back in the day, they moved in droves to get away from the king. They moved to the frontiers to get away from the merchant elites. When colonial governments are solidified, they're far away from the centers of power. They are out on the frontier, they're very rebellious, very difficult to control. The colonial governments have a difficult time controlling the Scots-Irish. The state governments have a difficult time controlling the Scots-Irish. The federal government has a tough time controlling the Scots-Irish. So that's why when the Whiskey Rebellion occurs in Washington's term, and it's led by 100 guys out in western Pennsylvania, Washington sends an army of 13,000 people out there to crush it. Because Washington's basically saying, that's it, I've had it with these people once and for all. Boom. 13,000 people is more men than Washington led during the American Revolution. I mean, isn't that a bit of an overkill? Jefferson thought so, it's why he resigned. Anyway, again, we're getting far into the weeds here. Another aspect of social development in the colonies is population growth. All sections of the colonies, the northern colonies, the Chesapeake, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Deep South, all saw population growth. The cities see population growth, and it comes from two sources: immigration from Europe, and not just England, and natural childbirth. Americans love to make babies. They're good at it. As a matter of fact, the average New England mother during her lifetime was pregnant 10 times. It was not uncommon for a New England mother to be pregnant 14, 15 times in her life. Now, half those kids didn't survive. But, I mean, even if half survived, you got 7, you got 5, that's a lot of kids. And they're going to make babies too. Yeah, Jacob.
Most of them moms were like during labor not making it.
Oh, that was a very common thing where you would die during childbirth. Absolutely. That's why it was kind of essential to have a midwife there. Because the midwife was a woman who was an expert at having children, because she had had a lot of children herself. She was there almost like the OBGYN, without the certificate on the wall. Yeah.
We actually just found yesterday that like documents from our great-great-great-grandparents, and they had 11 children, and 2 of them like didn't make it out of infancy, and so that kind of like, I mean that's mid-1800s, but that's still.
That speaks to you, though. I mean, that's a direct connection to you. That idea. And that's what we're, guys, that's what we're looking for. That's why we're studying this stuff. You can empathize with these people. You've got a connection to that. That's awesome stuff. The colonial population doubled every 25 years. That is rapid growth. Eventually, there are going to be more people here than there are in England. So how do you plan on controlling these colonies? Now, we mentioned women, okay, and the role of women, and the differences, and the gender differences in America. When we talk about social covers a wide variety of things because it's about people. So you can talk about ethnic diversity. You can talk about gender roles, male and female. You can talk about racial divisions, black, white, and other immigrant groups. You can talk about the rich and the poor. Social covers a lot of different areas because it deals with people. So, in terms of the roles of women in colonial society, it was generally similar throughout the American colonies. Women were expected to be housewives and mothers, caregivers, child rearers, a domestic. Women in New England, because the communities were so tight-knit, women generally tended to work together and share the labor. They would share the child care. They would share in the making of clothes or the making of food or, whatever work needed to be done. The women of the community would generally tend to work together. A good example of that is the quilting bee. That's where you had women sitting around in a circle, and everybody would take a portion of the quilt and sew it, and then they would put it all together, sell the quilt, and split the profit. So there was a female economy, kind of separate from the male mercantilist economy. There was a female economy, a bartering economy, if you will. If you were a midwife, let's say, if you were a midwife and you went to somebody's house to help this woman have children, okay, you might get paid with a pie and a couple of chickens. That's a barter economy. But midwifery was common, especially in New England and the mid-Atlantic states. Because if you were an expert at having children, you helped other women have children. Likewise, if you were constantly giving birth to children, you were, capable of feeding not just your children, but other children as well. And so you would provide wet nursing services. But let's be clear. While women operated independently within their own sphere, their own little domestic sphere, they had very few rights. If they were married, they were the property of their husband. If they were somebody's daughter, they were the property of the family. It was very rare for women to be on their own, be landowners, business owners, independent, to use a French term, femme soleil, women alone. Very rare. Which might explain what social development in the colonies. These women alone. What's that? No, there was no push for women's rights, except for maybe Anne Hutchinson. She was the wackadoo out of all of them. What about witchcraft? Yeah.
It was a reaction to paranoia of people not following the rules and women not being their roles.
Yeah, I mean, look, the witchcraft hysteria that you saw in Puritan New England, in Salem, was a byproduct of political upheaval and the fact that the Puritans were losing their influence. It was a reaction to women not playing their proper social role of being landowners or business owners or whatever. Most of the women who were accused of being witches in Salem generally tended to be widows who owned land. You know, it was reflective of economic divisions. And I've actually got a map that shows you the Salem, you know, the social realities of Salem. But to know that the Salem witch trials is a byproduct of political and social division in the community, that's a big takeaway. So women were expected to function within their sphere. Yet in the South, women exercised a great deal more influence because of something called the widowarchy. We know what a widow is. What does arc mean? Monarchy. Means govern, or government, or rule at least. Monarchy, mono, one, arc, rule, one ruler, monarchy, king. Patriarchy, patri, father, arc, rule by the father, patriarchal society. This is the widowarchy. Why do widows exercise an inordinate amount of influence?
Because they get their husband's lands.
They get their husband's land, which makes them very attractive to young up-and-comers. If I'm a young up-and-comer and I want to get ahead, I mean, after all, that's the American dream, to own land, become independently wealthy, and move up socially in station. If I want to do that, I can go out and I can find land and I can work hard and I can do all that. Or I could find some wealthy widow and marry her and get her land. Because as soon as the woman gets married, the man gets everything. So women would use that carrot and dangle it in front of men. And so they exercised a great deal of influence, let's say. I mean, does anybody recognize, this is the best example of the widowarchy in the South. Does anybody recognize the face of that young man getting married with her children sitting there? You see that face pretty much every day.
So it's Thomas Jefferson.
No, it is George Washington. George Washington married up. He was a gold digger. That's exactly it. You got it. Martha Custis had been married, had children. Her husband died because the mortality rate was higher in the South than it was in the North. And she was left with these huge tracts of land. And guys couldn't resist those huge tracts of land. And so they would seek out these widows. Washington was a gold digger, married up, inherited Martha Custis's children. George Washington and Martha Custis never had children of their own. Don't you find it highly ironic that the father of our country didn't give birth or didn't father any children? It's probably because he contracted smallpox when he was 18 in the West Indies. And it left him sterile. So it adds kind of a new complexity to the phrase, George Washington slept here. He slept a lot of places. But not much happened. All right, the other thing you guys mentioned was social mobility. And this was something that was a uniquely American characteristic, a distinctly American characteristic. The ability to not be bound by where you were born. In Europe, if you were born poor, you generally died poor. If you were born rich, you inherited your family's wealth. In America, there was no stopping. There were very few barriers to you being able to move up the social ranks. Now, granted, if you were a slave after 1676, after Bacon's Rebellion, there was pretty much a legal wall there. But even freed slaves could move up. It just was harder to do. But the idea of social mobility based on education and hard work, that is a uniquely American trait. All right. Another element of social life in America was how these people organized their communities. In New England and the northern communities, because there was not the widespread plantation systems, that you didn't have the widespread agriculture, the harder, rockier soil, the cooler climate, the people generally tended to live closer to one another. Especially in New England. All the communities in New England are planned. The people, the town fathers, sit down. Where will the land be? How will we subdivide the land? What does the subdivision of the land in this town tell you about the people living in this community? Yeah, Eric.
A lot of them were farmers.
Perhaps. Well, they have a church, they've got a village green, which is the center of town, they've got common land for everybody to put their livestock on. But look at the subdivision of the land, the property lines themselves. Jacob.
Is this where they get like the ideas now, like put all the houses like right next to each other? Is this where like the idea came from?
No, I mean, it's not necessarily where the idea came from. I mean, a lot of the Puritans who originally came over here, they were whole neighborhoods that uprooted from England and moved here, so they wanted to live close to one another. But if they are sitting down and they are taking a chunk of land and they have to literally draw on a map, line, 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 line. What does the drawing of those lines show you?
They're all equal?
They're equal. There is a general equality. And by the way, I love the word general. You know what general is? It's a qualifier. It means that if I find somebody who wasn't equal, I could say, well, I said generally. So generally is a great qualifier. They don't use, never, ever, ever use absolutes. You like the irony of that statement? So yes, they are generally equal. And if you think about what the Puritan ideal was, what the Puritan church was, if you go back to Model of Christian Charity with John Winthrop, where he says, we shall work together, live together, die together, endeavor together, suffer together, 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 he's emphasizing an equality. But the New England colonists oftentimes planned out their communities. Now, I talked about population growth. So let's say I'm a farmer right here. Okay, that's a larger tract of land, so someone a little bit well off. And let's say my wife gave birth to 10 kids, 4 survived. 4 survived. I die. Who gets my land? Oldest son. That is what is called primogeniture. Primo, first, gen, born. The firstborn son gets the land. That is a tradition carried over from Europe. So what happens to children 2 through 4?
They would all spread out and go further out in the community.
They move. That's why you have such rapid growth in New England. Remember we looked at that map when we were talking about the Pequot War, King Philip's War, and I said Massachusetts Bay was founded in 1630, and by 1636 they were all the way the hell out in Connecticut? Yeah, that's why. Because you got a lot of people coming over, they're giving birth to a lot of children, and they're all surviving. So you got to have a place to put them. Now what would happen is, if people moved further afield, you could continue to be a part of this town. But what's the downside? If you live all the way the heck out here, yeah.
Natives?
Well, natives, and that's definitely a problem, and the folks who push that frontier boundary are always coming up against the natives, absolutely. Not so much after King Philip's War, but yes. Eric?
You have to go a long way to get to church.
If you're expected to be in church every day, you got to go a long way to get to church. You got to go a long way to get to the town hall where the decisions are made, where the freeholders get together and make decisions. So what would be the best course of action for you living out here?
Build more of them.
Build more of what? What's
Them, like churches, schools.
So build your own town with your own church and your own town hall and make your own decisions. So what would usually happen was, if you wanted to create a town out here with your own town hall, common land, and all that stuff, you would ask permission of the parent town. And that's how towns grew. Again, you can look at any town in New England and how it was set up, and there are some commonalities. The idea of common land, where everybody could put their livestock to graze. The idea of a town green, wherever that is. I don't know where the town green is on here. But there was common land available for everybody. That demonstrates a willingness of the community to share. It's why Massachusetts is called a commonwealth. So the shortage for land, the fact that more people are living, is going to necessitate more land. We need more land. Moving further west. Wait. Moving further west. Further west. Further west. Further west. Now, let's take a community in New England, a planned community, a Puritan community like Salem. Take a look at what's happening here in Salem, and let me give you some perspective. Let me give you some perspective here. This is north. That's the water. The W with a circle around it is a person accused of being a witch. The D is somebody who defended people accused of being witches. The A's are the people who accused. Analyze this map and tell me what the hell is going on in Salem. John.
The separation of the community probably be due to class.
What do you mean due to class?
Well, you see that they're all focused on one side as far as the accusers.
Yes.
Defended and the witches are on one side.
Yes, so I'm still waiting to hear class. What class?
Well, from Scarlet Letter,
Ah.
people would accuse because so they could buy the other people's land. So probably the more fertile land would be on the ocean side. So those people were like, we're established, don't have to worry about it. But people on like sort of like the frontier side, they're like, I want to get the hell out of here. So they're accusing left and right.
That is true. There is that. You are right. The people here are way more established than the people out here. This is frontier area. This is, the original community. As a matter of fact, they even referred to these as two different places. This was called Salem Town, and this was called Salem Village. Yeah.
The accusers were all close together, probably equal and more, but the accused witches were all spread apart and wealthy and landowners.
Wealthy landowners being accused by poor farmers. That is definitely an aspect here. So you see an economic class division. What else might be happening here? Knowing what we previously looked at. Yeah.
It's probably like the brothers and sisters that had a few that got forced out and they couldn't stay, so they had to go move somewhere else.
Well, okay, so they're moving all the way the heck out here. They're out here on the frontier, Indian attacks. If they want to go to church, these poor people on the frontier are going to hop in their wagon, go all the way the heck back here. What are you going to say?
They're trying to take the land back from their siblings who inherited it.
What do you, who's, I don't,
Or the people on the frontier
yes,
are trying to take the land back.
take the land back?
Well, take the land of their siblings who inherited it. Maybe. Okay.
Nope, that's okay though, good guess. It has something to do with who owns the land. Yeah. Okay, a lot of the women accused of being witches are widows who own land. They inherited the land from their husbands. So that creates some social strife because women aren't following their traditional roles. That's a problem.
Maybe the accusers want to take the widow's land and have them killed so they can take it without having to marry them.
Perhaps. I don't know. It's a good guess. It's as good as any. There are at least 10 different theories out there as to why this happened. None of them are correct. I will say this. All of them are plausible. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Guys, these people out here wanted to create their own town. And these guys wouldn't let them. And you're a poor guy living out on the frontier. You got to travel all the way the heck back here to go to church, to go to a town hall meeting, and the rich people back here are telling me what to do. How do you know what my life is like? I mean, you're making my life extra hard. We just want to create our own community out here. We want our own minister. We want our own town hall. So the best answer we can come up with, is that the map of Salem reflects political, economic, and social divisions within the community, whatever they may be. We don't have an answer. I've read articles where they've posited at least 10 different theories as to why this happened. Were the girls possessed by the devil? Probably not. Were they girls with nothing better to do but the daughter of poor people who heard their parents complaining about the rich people who may exercise an inordinate amount of control? Possibly. Were the girls affected by contaminated wheat? A mold spore in the wheat that caused some form of hysteria? Perhaps. Nobody knows. Were the people out here, the puritanical people living out here, fearful of the loss of Puritan influence? I mean, look at when this happened, 1692. You've got to place this event in context. What else is happening around them at this time? In 1686, the Dominion of New England is established. Puritan control is wrested from Massachusetts Bay. Then the Glorious Revolution takes place, which leads to the Americans overthrowing Edmund Andros in 1689. But even though the Americans overthrow the king's representative in the colonies in 1689, in 1691, the Puritans lost the charter to Massachusetts Bay. It was never granted back to them. So the Puritans who had owned Massachusetts Bay now no longer own it. So does that then cause hysteria, paranoia among the Puritan leadership? There are people out to get us in all corners. There's a lot happening here. But the best we can say is that it reflects political, economic, and social division. Byproduct of economic, religious divisions in the community, nobody really knows what happened. Eric.
How is it economic?
Rich merchants, poor farmers, class envy. I'm poor. You are getting wealthy off the back of my labor. That is unfair. Guys, that is a chestnut as old as time in this country. All right, another social aspect of life in America is the evolution, the origins and evolution of slavery, which I believe we've covered. Pretty well. Okay? That, you know, we've talked about indentured servants and then moving to slavery as a labor force in America. I just wanted to take this opportunity to go a little bit more in depth on the evolution of slavery. What takeaway did anybody have on the evolution of slavery? Anything good? Allison?
After Bacon's Rebellion, the planter elite realized that a non-landowning white class was dangerous to have.
Okay, a non-landowning or a poor white class was dangerous to the planter elite. Therefore, you needed to have a labor source that was more under control. Guys, if that's the one takeaway you have about the origins of slavery in this country, that's the takeaway to have. Because it's always a question. Because it's a big ticket item. Where did slavery in America come from? Because we've been dealing with it since 1619. So it's kind of important to understand where it comes from. What's that?
You say that one.
That Bacon's rebellion led the planter elites to realize that having a poor white underclass spreading throughout the frontier was unstable. It was an unstable element in society. And what they needed to do was they needed to have a labor force that was under control and was not promised anything. You got it. So you're going to see slavery, pretty much pervade American society. And it's legal throughout the American colonies. It's just not profitable throughout the American colonies. There are just some American colonies where it's not worth it to have slavery. So in the plantation South, where you've got large amount of land and a lot of work for slaves to do, then you're going to see the expansion of slavery. And you can see here, there's your Chesapeake slaves. Tobacco. Here's rice. Okay? Those are where the big money makers were. Different types of slavery, which I think we already talked about. The gang system and the task system, correct? Okay? Tobacco slaves have a different daily life than rice slaves. But here's the thing. No matter where they lived in America or what they did for a living, whether it was rice cultivation or tobacco, these people were united by a shared experience. They are ripped from their place of origin. And by the way, African is not monolithic. It is not one thing. It's a continent with many different people, with many different languages, with many different customs. If you're from Senegal, it's different than being from Gambia. If you're from Angola, it's different than being from Mozambique. But the thing is, these people are ripped from wherever they are from and de-Africanized over time. Imbued with more European culture, the language, the religion, the customs, the dress, etc., etc. So this is a unifying, the slave experience is a unifying experience that defines a group. So by one generation out, most slaves, if they've been imported from Africa, most slaves have lost their African identity. And during the Great Awakening in the late early 1700s, a lot of these slaves are now exposed to Christian beliefs. And so they're going to start to inculcate them into their culture. Now, granted, you every now and then have your little pockets of isolated slaves, like your Gullahs in the coastal Carolinas, but for the most part, slaves in America spoke English, practiced Christianity, dressed like Europeans. Yeah.
What's so significant about the Gullahs? Like, why are they?
It's just an example of an isolated pocket of people that really did not change as much as the other groups. Growing family opportunities. Just because you were a slave did not mean that you did not have families, did not mean that you didn't have husbands and wives and children. You did. But because the families are ripped apart by sales, auctions, etc., it was necessary to maintain strong kinship ties with all elements of your family. That's why the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins are important, because that traditionally they are a tie a family tie that you could count on. Now, slavery becomes codified into law through the slave codes. Yes, there were slaves before 1676, but it was never really written down what constitutes a slave, what can slaves do, what can't slaves do. That's all written down after Bacon's Rebellion. So the slave codes are rules. And then on the plantation, slaves are trained for different tasks, different jobs. And punishment is meted out for disobedience. And I mean, we could sit here and talk all day about this little chestnut. What came first, the slavery or the racism? Did the racism lead to the acceptance of black slavery because they were seen as less than, or were they seen as less than because they had been enslaved and they were being taken advantage or abused? Maybe it's both, I don't know. See, that's the thing, I don't know, it's a great debate.
They went to Africa, they saw people who, like the Africans in their culture, which was less than them, but they already had slaves, so they were already, probably like a mix of both.
Okay, yeah.
Racism has always existed.
Always? Foreversies and eversies? Okay. Well, I mean, slavery's existed, you know, pretty much uninterrupted through a variety of different cultures, all the way up until the 1800s. I mean, we're one of the last societies to get rid of slavery. Us and the Russians. Slavery throughout the Western Hemisphere is varied. It is not just one experience. I mean, the experience here of Caribbean sugar slaves is a lot different than tobacco slaves. It's a lot different than rice slaves. That's harvesting of sugar right there. Yeah.
In the Caribbean, a slave that was sent there probably could hope for living a year after that. They worked them so hard and
The mortality rate, that's right, the mortality rate of sugar slaves was extraordinarily high. It was more likely than not that you did not survive. As a matter of fact, a lot of the slaves who came to America during this time weren't coming directly from Africa, they were coming from the Caribbean. And it was Caribbean sugar planters who were looking to diversify their portfolio. Hey, what else can I grow? Oh, rice? Sure. And so a lot of sugar planters would move from the Caribbean to the coastal Carolinas and bring their slaves with them. One little experiment they tried was they started a labor exchange program in the Carolinas. As the planters moved into South Carolina and coastal North Carolina, they encountered the Tuscarora Indians, the Yamasee Indians. They loaded those guys on boats and shipped them to the Caribbean and had them become sugar slaves. For a time, that was like the #1 export from the Carolinas, Indian slaves. Most of them died. So the question becomes, if you're a slave, how can you allow yourself to be, taken advantage of like that? Didn't you resist? Wasn't there some form of resistance? Or was the experience so bad that you were psychologically broken? Yeah, Jake.
Wasn't there a rebellion in the Middle Passage?
No, the Middle Passage was the boat ride from Africa to the Western Hemisphere. Stono Rebellion is probably... Look, Stono Rebellion is always on the test. I'll tell you that right now. The Stono Rebellion. Okay? That's probably the best known, and I will get back to that previous slide, but you brought it up. The Stono Rebellion is probably the best known of the slave rebellions prior to the American Revolution. And this was a South Carolina slave rebellion. South Carolina slaves, what would they have been doing? Rice. Why would they have had the time to rebel? Because they are isolated and not under the watchful eye of overseers. And look at what happens. While the cat's away, the mice will play. Maybe they need to tighten the slave codes among the rice slaves and stop granting them so much freedom. These slaves in South Carolina, these rice slaves, organized themselves, stole weapons, killed white people, and started to march toward Florida. Why are they going to Florida? For the what?
Spanish.
Yes, for the Spanish. Remember I told you how the Spanish and the English were constantly at odds? Well, one of the ways that the Spanish tried to undermine the English was to try to lure the slaves from the English plantations to come to Florida. The Spanish governor of Florida issued a paper that said any slave making it to Florida would be granted their freedom. And again, think about the context. This takes place in 1739. Yeah.
How would like the slaves find out about this though if they're like
Word of mouth. Word of mouth.
Did they make it?
Nope. They were stopped. They were executed. But does anybody remember what happened in 1733? I know that's difficult, but I don't know if anybody remembers it. Something was founded in 1733.
border between South Carolina and Florida, which was the port of Pool and
Which is what state? Georgia. Georgia! Guys, Georgia is founded in 1733 as a buffer between South Carolina and Florida. Why does England need that buffer? Because the Spanish in Florida are attempting shenanigans like this.
So they had time to go get them.
Huh?
So when they were marching to Florida, they had time to go get them.
Yes, exactly. Now, the idea of rebellion and running away, that is what's called active resistance. This is the uncommon. It's not like you see a rebellion happening every week. You don't. The most common form of resistance was passive resistance. Work slowdowns, work stoppages, slow pedaling it. Excuse me, I need you to go over there and get that rice out of the wagon. I'm getting there. I need you to move faster. I'm moving as fast as I can. That's resistance. That's sticking it to the man. Yeah. Sure, absolutely. But I mean, look. I mean, you know, when I have people tell me what to do, I hate people telling me what to do. But I do it. But if it's somebody I don't respect, or if it's somebody that I don't care for, I put my own little spin on it and maybe, you know, don't do it as well as I possibly could have, or do it a little bit slowly. And in my head, that's me saying, you know, sticking it to them. Sure, but are you willing to put up with the pain if you can psychologically have that victory in your head? Yeah.
Kente wouldn't think about that his name was Tom.
What?
From the Road series.
Yeah, Alex Haley, got it.
Yeah. Your name is Todd. You kept getting whipped and whipped and whipped and whipped.
Oh, I was confused because that's my name.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah. I was like, what? What happened? I'm Kunta Kinte? No. Go ahead.
They did the same thing, the Americans did the same thing in Japanese POW camps.
Yes!
Because they would like steal stuff from them and the psychological factor would like keep them going.
This was a major field of study in the late 1950s and early 1960s on college campuses against the backdrop of the civil rights movement. That people went back and looked back 100 years, 200 years to what slaves were doing during this time. And they encountered this idea of passive resistance, which, how do people who are oppressed fight back without fighting back? And it's these little psychological games that are played. One of the elements that they looked at, and you talk about Japanese POW camps, was the folks compared the experience of a slave on a plantation to the Jews in the concentration camps. Because that was the most recent example that they could, do a widespread sociological investigation of. So they went and they interviewed people who had survived the concentration camps. How did you put up with this oppression? How did you resist? Yeah.
Then last year we learned about like rubber plantations in Africa, and they would cut their hands off if they didn't work hard enough.
That's Africa. That's different.
Like,
That would
I mean, and look,
wouldn't that make them work slower?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have to work with no hands.
Go ahead, work! Slaves in America had fingers cut off, had ears cut off. They had all manner of things cut off. It just depended on where you were. I gotta move it along here. Otherwise, we're just not gonna cover stuff. This was the largest slave rebellion prior to the American Revolution. It took place in New York City, if you can believe it. Because New York City was a port city, it is where a lot of slaves entered America and were held for sale. So it was a slave market. And then slavery in the North, it was sparse, not widespread, not economically viable, because of the variety of jobs that you had and the fact that you didn't have large-scale agriculture in the North. There was really no need for slaves. You had a very dynamic economy, and the people living in the North who wanted to make a wage, here's the thing, you need to fill out a pass before you go, because you can't be walking around the hallways with nothing. So fill out the pass, then sign out, then go. But you had the right idea. The people living in the North who are earning a wage, they don't want to have to compete with slave labor. Because slave labor can undercut wage labor. I mean, look at the people making iPods over in China today, who are making what, $1 a day, $2 a day? Can you imagine if you had to pay an American to make iPods? They're not earning $1 or $2 a day. Cheap labor undercuts expensive labor. So the Americans living in the North did not want to have to compete with slave labor. So slavery did not really expand in the North. Yeah.
Is that why the slave made it like a certain point up north and they were like, hey, the less slaves in the South, the better, so
Yes.
your freedom.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. Again, slavery is technically legal in every American colony prior to the American Revolution. But as northern colonies come to the realization that it's not economically viable, and as people in 1776 start talking about these crazy ideas of liberty and freedom and all men are created equal and whatnot, that's when northern colonies start creating laws to ban slavery. So you have, in the North, gradual emancipation of slaves. I think the last state north of the Mason-Dixon line to get rid of their slaves was New Jersey. Now, the intellectual elements of colonial life. Intellectual, your brain. Okay? How you think. The importance of education in America cannot be overstated, especially in the northern colonies, especially in Massachusetts, New England, Puritan societies, because the idea of education was if you were educated, you could better access your Bible. So in 1647, Massachusetts passes the first public education law, mandatory public education. Ivy League colleges are established in the 1630s, 40s, 50s to train ministers. Because education led to your religious salvation. And remember I was telling you about the Puritan school primers, how they would imbue it with religious ideas? This is an example of a page from, I believe this was a first grade level book. Taught you your alphabet. Had a picture, had a sentence, went with the letter. In Adam's fall, we sinned all. I know it looks like finned, but that's how they made their S's. That's how they made the lowercase s's back then. Heaven to find, the Bible mind. Christ crucified, for sinners died. The deluge drowned, the earth around. There you go. So you got your religion intertwined with your education. Colleges and universities. And a matter of fact, these colleges and universities, this is where you saw the training of New Light ministers. Colleges like Harvard and Yale and the other Ivy Leagues. Now, we talked about the Great Awakening as a religious movement in America. But it's also a philosophical, intellectual movement as well. How can I reach God? According to the Great Awakening, the individual had an emotional connection to God. I feel... Did you get a pass? Everybody, get a pass before you go. You cannot walk the hallways without a pass. No, you're not carrying that to the bathroom. I don't want bathroom germs on my clipboard. There you go. All right. The Great Awakening is a philosophical movement of how best to find God. And according to the Great Awakening and New Light ministers, you could find God through emotion. I feel the Holy Spirit in me. I know God is there because I can feel it. It's an emotional connection. The flip side of that, but also the complementary side of that, is the Enlightenment. This is happening at the same time as the Great Awakening. And it's just another route to the same destination. How can I best understand God? The Great Awakening preachers would say, through emotion. Enlightenment philosophers would say, through reason and science. Most of the Enlightenment philosophers, Ben Franklin being the most famous in America. But I mean, you know, Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu. Most of those Enlightenment philosophers who believed in science, generally tended to be deists. This is the philosophy of deism. What do deists believe? They believe that there is one God. So far, so good. Christians would buy into that. There is one God. God is perfect. Okay? So far, so good. Religion and science together. Evidence of God can be seen in nature. All right, now we're starting to get a little hippy-dippy. Nature functions according to the natural laws of nature. Natural laws. Really? Could I have more time? All right. Guys, just real quick. Natural law is evidence of God's existence. And if you use science, you can find evidence of God through experimentation and observation. That's what deism is. It marries the idea of science and religion. And it led to, they believed that you could make life better for Americans. You know what, I'm going to take 5 minutes before the test next class and talk about the Enlightenment and the Zenger trial.